Thank you all for being here. Appreciate the introduction. My name is Greg Long. I'm most recognized in the surfing world as the big wave surfer, and that's a very fair sort of name that they've given me, Greg Long, the big wave surfer, as that is what the majority of my life consisted of, which was traveling around the globe, following the world's largest ocean storms in an effort to find and ride the biggest surfable waves on the planet. Now, anybody who has any sort of experience in and around the ocean knows that it's a very unpredictable and unruly environment. Even if you don't, we all know that. And there are significant consequences should you be caught off guard or should something go wrong. Now, when we're talking about the world's biggest waves, we're talking about 6, 7, 8-story tall buildings. You can imagine that the risks and the stakes at play in order to ride them, they continue to escalate. We don't like to talk about it, but there is sort of a metaphorical line that next greatest, biggest wave of your life, it could be that. Or if something goes terribly wrong, it could be one that could end it. But we walk that line with very mindful safety precautions, diligent physical and mental training. But one day, I myself actually did stumble over to the other side of that line. It all ended well, which is why I'm still here, able to share the story with you. But as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. A video is worth far more. So rather than trying to describe these waves and articulate, without further ado, a little bit about my life of big wave surfing.
Being immersed in the ocean during its most wild of states. Must learn to mind, embrace the inevitable emotion of fear. The very moment we enter the water, knowing we will need control over the only thing you can learn are years of physical preparation and mental fortitude. With a playing field that is constantly in motion and always changing, it's very easy to make mistakes. And the consequences, should the worst occur, they're very real. But when you reach deep within yourself, bringing your mind and body into
life of big wave surfing is if I'm crazy or not. And as the saying goes, one person's craziness is just another's reality. That video that you saw just there is mine. Now, you ask any psychologist when you present somebody with a peculiar passion with life-threatening consequences, they're going to ask that you go look at that individual's childhood to determine where the origins of such peculiar behavior began. And my introduction to big wave surfing began here. I was introduced to the water at a very young age, and most kids' introduction looks just like this. But what was different in mine is my parents would teach me very extreme apnea breath-holding techniques when we would go to the pool. By the time that I was 5 years old, I could already hold my breath for 5 minutes and free dive 200 feet. Just kidding. That was mommy and me swim class. That's literally how it started. I was no superhuman child. But I did grow up at a beautiful beach in Southern California, not a big wave destination. This is what a big wintertime swell in my hometown looked like. But my introduction to the ocean came from a place of study. When I would be brought down to the beach, my dad would ask that I sit there and observe my conditions before I was allowed to paddle out. Now, for a kid, that seems like a form of punishment. But what I quickly came to realize that in timing the time between the big waves that came in, observing where the rocks and the hazards were, which way the currents were going, he would ask that I knew what the tide was doing. All this information gave me a sense of confidence of my playground that I was about to enter. And when I would go out, I would have a lot more confidence, and I could predict within a certain probability what these changes that were going to take like throughout the course of the day. So that was my sort of childhood introduction to risk management. And I took that along with a very deep passion for my sport, a focus on the training, physical, mental side, probably an unhealthy amount of perfectionism sprinkled on top. And fast forward to when I was 16 years old, photos like this started showing up in the magazine. My parents had always impressed upon the importance that no matter what I did in life, I just continually pushed and challenged myself. And when this started showing up in the media, I know my mom wished that she probably told me something different, like don't do dangerous shit. But at that point, I had my passion. I knew what I wanted to do with my life, and that was find and ride the biggest surfable waves on this planet. Understanding the importance of that previous education before ever going into an environment. And as we know, the ocean is one of the most, if not the most unpredictable. No two waves are ever the same, constantly changing. In a moment's notice, you need to be able to adapt. And while that understanding that information and research and knowledge prior to going into these environments is going to pay huge dividends in my ability to do just that. So I started researching everything I could about the sport, and it was at that time in the early 2000s where it was really taking off, but there wasn't a whole lot of diligent information about it. But then I started to realize that so much of what I wanted to learn and what I could learn wasn't really about surfing. It was what was beyond that. I started diving deep into the world of meteorology, studying how and where these giant ocean storms are created, how far these waves actually have to travel in distance, sometimes thousands of miles before they hit the coastline. I started studying underneath some of the world's leading surf forecasters, learning how to understand the incredible amount of data that is out there, sometimes real time, other times projected, but how that all comes into play when it comes down to paddling out off the beach and trying to ride a single giant wave. And so the more that I studied and went down this, it was an endless rabbit hole. Then took me beneath the ocean surface, understanding that all these waves are shaped by the bottom contours. So if I went and I looked at what was at the sea floor of these different waves, I could have a better understanding of how they were going to move depending on the swell direction, depending on the tide. So what you're looking at is a bathymetrical chart of one of the world's greatest big waves. It's only 20 miles from here in Half Moon Bay, called Mavericks. And it wasn't just the charts. I would physically go out and dive the bottom contours. So I had that intimate knowledge that I could use to my advantage, that I could adapt in a moment's notice and predict with some level of reason that this wave was going to be shaped or form in a certain direction. So it was a very thoughtful study. And that passion quickly became a career. And it was an amazing time as the advancements in technology, where big wave surfing, it used to be a 4-month of the year, you would sit and wait for winter to come around. I started to realize that, well, there's the southern hemisphere winter, the northern hemisphere winter. These storms are happening on the planet every single day. And with this information and technology, I could hop on a flight and put myself in front of that storm down in South Africa, down in Chile, over in Portugal. And it became a 12-month of the year pursuit. Here's one of my favorite big waves on the island of Maui, a break called Jaws. Another one, Thundercloud Reef, over on the island of Fiji. And in case you haven't realized, Mavericks, Thundercloud Reef, Jaws, Dungeons, they all have very ominous names, but they've all been rightfully earned. Incredible big waves down in Mexico as well. So this became a 12-month of the year pursuit, and those photos and the video started occurring on a much regular basis. And the media and a lot of the surfing world really just thought I was crazy. And if you didn't know better and you didn't understand all the preparation that was going in before I was actually paddling out and catching these waves, it's very easy to do so. And I was quickly coined as that high-risk adrenaline junkie who's going to probably have a really tough time getting approved for a life insurance policy. And while as my profession was big wave surfing, that's true, the fact that it was the idea that it was reckless was everything but. There was countless hours of training physically, mentally, learning to be able to control my mind, my emotions, regulate my heartbeat in the most stressful of environments. There was the other unfortunate side that comes with this is the fact that wipeouts are going to happen and you're going to be forced to spend extended periods of time underwater. I started learning that there was people who've trained themselves to hold their breath for 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. Who are they and what do they know that I don't? So I sought out some of the world's greatest freedivers, learned from them to a point where I felt like I was prepared, should the worst occur, to be able to hold my breath to that level of time. For those wondering, that's not my mom in the pool with me there. Her name's Hanli Prienslu, a dear friend and a world champion freediver from South Africa. Safety was another huge component to what I was doing out there. I would regularly train with the same group of friends, the surfers, but water safety specialists as well. And we would sit and we would write down every single potential worst case scenario that we might encounter, what that would look like, how that might happen. And we would create emergency action plans for that particular event based on the equipment that we had. And then we would create multiple layers of that. Plan B, Plan C, Plan D, because nothing in this world ever goes according to plan perfectly. Right here you're looking at what it might look like if you were to extract somebody who's unconscious using a jet ski and multiple people who are operating as the rescuers. These giant days, I referenced Mavericks in Half Moon Bay, which is just 20 miles from here. It's one of the most incredible spectacles to watch. A giant winter swell here. If you fall on the wrong wave there, a certain day, the currents, the tides will sweep you into this fortress of rocks, which is only 100 meters on the inside. Very real possibility. I would go and I would look on the lowest tides on these big days, and I would navigate my way through. Here I am with a friend, pinpointing every single possible place that could be seen as a safety passage to either get past one of those giant rocks that are as large as this sort of tower behind us here, knowing that that information could, if it ever happened, be the difference of success and failure. And by success and failure, it literally translates to life and death in this sort of a situation. And then no matter what, regardless of the conditions, I would take all of these new ideas and research and theory and actually go out and put them into practice. Every single day, no matter what the circumstances, the conditions, there's something that you can learn. With that open mind, that open heart, there's something that you can learn. And it was that continuous obsession to better myself and to learn more that led me gradually to riding some of the biggest waves in the world. Now, I talked in the very beginning about the number one question that I get asked, and that's if I'm crazy or not. And hopefully I've dispelled a little bit of that concern in you all. The second most common question, and a few have already asked today, is if I get scared when I'm out there and doing this. And the answer is absolutely. fear, to me, is actually one of the most misunderstood emotions that we have in this life and world. Society's impressed this idea that it's something negative to be ashamed of. When you feel fear or vulnerable, you need to sort of compartmentalize it and avoid whatever it is that's invoking that sensation. Through regularly immersing myself in these moments, when that horizon line goes black, and there's that 50-foot wall of water that I've misjudged where I was sitting, and I know that I'm going to be inevitably caught inside of, yeah, I have that moment of fear. But understanding it as space for growth, that is when those moments most often come about. Danger is real, and there's obviously that side of it, but that fear of not putting myself in that situation and trying whatever it is, as that's what I was looking to do, that's the negative fear response. Seeing those moments as something positive to draw inspiration from, as they are just showing you where you have that room for personal growth in your life. And by regularly immersing myself, it came to be one of the most incredible emotions today. So whether it's big wave surfing, public speaking, learning to dance with my partner, I choose to move towards those and study whatever it is, because usually on the other side, that's where the growth happens. And growth, that is one of the fundamental purposes of our human existence here, and whatever path, unique lives that we have. So I talked earlier that I grew up in Southern California, which wasn't home to big wave surfing by any means, but we came to find in the 2000s it actually is home to the largest surfable wave on the planet. The catch is, it's not on the coast. It's 110 miles out in the middle of the ocean. We have a series of islands called the Channel Islands off of Southern California. Thousands of years ago, as sea levels were lower, it actually was an island, but as sea levels rose, it became submerged. So 100 miles in the middle of the ocean, you have an underwater mountain with some of the world's largest breaking waves on top of it. It's called the Cortez Bank. So you can imagine in my 20s when I found out that this existed so close to my hometown, what that meant to me. It basically became my and most of big wave surfers' version of Mount Everest. And I did everything I could to research about it, prepare for it, and launch an expedition to go surf it every single time it broke. In the course of the last 20 years, that's accumulated to about 15 days, where you get the swell and the weather and all the conditions to coincide perfectly, so not often. What this wave would look like from sea level would be something around this size, though we've ridden waves much larger than that out there. I talked a little bit about that fine line that we walked in big wave surfing, managing the risks, but that next greatest wave of your life could potentially be one that ends it if something goes wrong. And it was during an expedition out there to paddle the biggest waves we ever had in 2012, I crossed over that line. And had it not been for my safety team being there, reacting exactly as we had so diligently trained for so long, a lot of people said, oh, you're so lucky to still be alive. There's always an element of luck in it. But when it comes to my life, the life of the friends who I choose to surf with, and the responsibility that we have for one another, we don't rely on luck. It is those countless hours of training that we fall back on. It's the extensive amount of trust in one another, which is formed through that time and that shared commitment to that goal and that objective together. Anyways, reacting without hesitation to save my life, knowing that behind every one of their heroic actions stood another friend willing to commit and support them for that plan B, plan C, is why I am still here today. Now, the finer details of all that are going to have to be shared, because there is a great story through that, as you can imagine. But that, ironically, I look back at as the greatest gift I've ever received in my life. And it's kind of hard to sort of see and picture it, so it leads a little bit of explanation. The greatest gift was that humble moment of reflection. As I waited the Coast Guard to fly out and pick me up and medevac me back to the coast and the mainland, that humble reflection was really thinking about my life. And when I say I thought about my life, it wasn't in the context of big wave surfing. The awards, the accolades, the world titles, materialistic possessions, so much of what society impressed upon us as being important, those were the farthest things from my mind. When I thought about my life, I thought about who I was as a person. I thought about the incredible amount of good fortune that I had on this wild journey of big wave surfing. Of that good fortune, could I have shared a little bit more of that with the people that I crossed paths with? I thought about my daily actions and interactions with people. Could I have been kinder, shared more smiles, been more patient with my differences, whether it's opinion or otherwise with people? I thought about my greatest awards and accolades. Again, it had nothing to do with that stuff that I was chasing and those goals and dreams. Now, those are important. They serve as guiding lights in our life. But when I thought about my greatest accomplishments, it was every time that on this path I had done something to give back in some way, to help somebody else in some way. And then I thought about my friends and my family. And that had that been the end of it, would my actions have been expressive of how much I truly valued them, how much I loved them? Those were what I felt to be the most important in all of this grand scheme and this wild adventure and this obsession and passion and so much drive, so goal-oriented. That's what I distilled everything down to. So the Coast Guard shows up, packaged me up, and I'm airlifted back to the coast in San Diego. And it was at this point in time that I promised myself I was done surfing big waves. I quit. I've pushed it to the end. I've got a second chance. That's it. I am done. I promise. So as you can imagine, your whole life has been focused and put towards one passion, one goal. When it seems to be uprooted, as it was for me, it really kind of makes you contemplate. But I had had that moment to really remember what was truly important. So I felt like I had such definitive guidelines of how I wanted to be living and what I wanted to be doing moving forward, that it didn't really matter that that was what was important, whether it was surfing or any other aspect. I knew where those guiding lights, and they would take me somewhere extravagant. There's a multitude of avenues we can go in life. So I took a few months off, recovered physically, recovered emotionally, and I, of course, out of habit, was still following all those storms around the planet, watching my friends set off, chasing these big waves, coming back with incredible adventurous stories. And it was after some time that I started to think, wow, I kind of miss it. You know, as much as watching those storms and the weather around the world was ingrained in me, so was this deep love for surfing and big waves. And then I started to think, well, technically nobody heard me make that promise that I was going to quit. So, you can see where it's going. I did eventually return. And over time, that confidence increased and came back. And it was really the realization that falling in life, and especially in this dynamic environment in the ocean, is inevitable. That I never went surfing expecting that I wasn't going to fall. Of course, I trained and I prepared and I made my decisions in a way that I would minimize the possibility of that happening, but that's not the world that we live in. Eventually, things are going to go sideways. So that thought that trying to avoid this ever happening again, versus drawing on that inspiration, the fear that it might happen again, but that is where the personal growth happens. And for me, it was back in the ocean, and ultimately back surfing the Cortez Bank, which I did a few years thereafter. The same safety team. This time I was actually out there surfing alone, 4 or 5 story waves, beautiful blue water, sun was out, a much different experience than the previous one. So this whole world of big wave riding and the adventures within, it's been what I recognize as my greatest teacher in life. I've learned a tremendous amount. One, the fact that this world is ever-changing, incredibly dynamic. There's going to be so many unforeseen obstacles put before us that there needs to be a level of acceptance of that. And in that level of acceptance comes the diligent action towards controlling whatever that is to the best of your ability, learning to go with the flow momentarily as things do go sideways, get turned upside down, and then learning from that experience and how to better ourselves and continue forward on that path. And if that path changes, so be it. that there will be another adventure down the road for you, and whatever that may be. It's showed me the importance in surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals, a team who you know that you can trust and support in those most dire situations. And that bond and the strength that's created there comes from that shared vision, the same goals, the same mindsets, and those hours put forth preparing for when those moments may come about. And that bond is unbreakable when you do have that alignment, that same passion, that same love, not just for whatever it is that you are doing, but for one another. The oceans taught me that it is so important to take and regularly take those humble moments of pause in your life to reflect and redefine what's important, and not in that external world of the goals, the aspirations, the dreams, the jobs. That's important. That is the guiding lights that sets us off these courses of adventure. But when I talk about reestablishing what's in here, of what's truly important, and making sure that that is in alignment with what you are doing on the outside world, and the balance that can be struck there is so profound. And when you can blend that is within here with that external world, the amount of fun, the amount of adventure, the level in which you're able to perform surpasses any other trick, tip that I have experienced in my life. And I have done the deepest of dives into that world of looking into the mental processes behind all of this. And it's also proven to me that there's no greater reality to be living than one that's just a little bit crazy. So with that, it is my respect and gratitude that I was invited here to share a little bit about my big wave surfing, and remembering that those greatest challenges will often be disguised, and in the moment we won't see them as such. But they will be the most beautiful moments, full of the most profound growth going forward. And to welcome them with open arms is life-changing. With that, thank you for listening. Again, incredibly grateful for the invitation. It's respect and gratitude. Thank you.